Daniel Lucas, and welcome to Book 101. Book 101 is all about the books that I read for the last 40 years. And today I have my special guest. He is the author of several books, no other than Mr. Dan Hank. Yes, Mr. Dan, and can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. My name is Dan Henk. I'm I'd say by this point lifelong because I'm 50, so I've been doing this for over 30 years at this point. But I do illustrations for magazines and books, and I'm an author, and I write my own books. And but I just got back the rights to my first two books and extensively re-edited and re-released them.
Last episode we talked about your anthologies, the Never Dead. So can we do the recap?
Sure. It's 16 stories by 14 different authors. They're all along the lines of, Twilight Zone, Tales from the Crypt, Outer Limits, like short, like dramatic short stories that have kind of a dark tone.
The Never Dead is available worldwide.
Yeah, everything Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, Spotify, anywhere where fine books are sold or Kindle.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Dan Hank. The latest anthologies, The Never Dead.
Well, they're all dark short stories, like I said, along the lines of like Twilight Zone or Outer Limits, Tales from the Crypt. So they usually involve a fairly dramatic twist. It starts with characters and they put in awkward and strange situations.
What books of yours we gonna talk about today?
Let's talk about Well, I got my debut novel. Get the right. I reacquired the rights to it, and I did an extensive re-edit and some more stories and changed some of the dialogue around. I think when I wrote that book, I wrote it quite a while ago, and I think I'm a more fluid and better author now. And I went through it with my years of experience and tried to bring the story back to life. So I think it's a very good story. I think that I would do more justice to the tale to tell it in my current voice.
Yes, so the Black Seas of Infinity, why you republish?
Why did I publish it?
Republish, yes.
Um, well, when I wrote it, like, all right, long story short, is a concept that I've had for a long time. And originally, I was going to be a comic artist, and I developed it as a graphic novel. And that's right when all the comic companies were doing very poorly sales wise. The movies basically saved them. But I had a couple companies that picked it up for release as a graphic novel, and then they folded because at that point in time, everyone was folding. And I finally interviewed with one of the major publishers, and they just wanted their properties to sell while they were concerned about making money. So I said, to myself, why don't I just release it as an illustrated novel? I always enjoyed those growing up, so I'll do one, of my own volition and craft exactly what I think is needed.
So, Mr. Dan, what inspired you to write The Black Seas of Infinity?
Well, when I was a little kid, we my parents lived on isolated army bases, and we didn't have a TV. And the way I'd entertain myself is I go to the local library and I'd pick up a lot of books and I'd read them. And at some point, I'd go, this there's a story that I think, you know, should be told that I have not seen told that I would really, I really enjoy myself. So I'm going to put it out. And so it evolved slowly from a comic book into an illustrated novel. And then I made it a novel. It was initially published by Anarchy Books. And then I required the rights from Anarchy Books and I had Community Press publish it. And it was out for about 9 years. And then I required the rights from them with the help of another author named Jeff Strand. And I said, now I've always had this story. I think it's a very strong story. Why don't I just rework it a little bit so it really strikes? It really, has impact.
What behind the title of the Black Seas of Infinity?
Well, the Black Seas Infinity, it's a quote from H.P. Lovecraft, and he was a huge influence, especially in my early days. And the Black Seas Infinity are just there's a lot going on that you don't understand. So you're venturing out into a world that you know very little about. The like everything from the oceans, we've only explored like 20% of them. Obviously space is something that we've not explored hardly at all. So there's a lot out there, and we're always finding stuff that we're not aware of. And in this story, it involves a person that works for the government, and they recover crash alien technology. I did a bit of research into like Roswell and stuff like that to make sure that I kind of had the general flow of how things seem to go with the government. But this person eventually gets fired from the government and goes back and steals the alien technology. But as he's retreating from the government, the whole government falls apart. So, the first he was concerned with them pursuing him, but then now he's concerned with just surviving in this new environment.
Very well said, Mr. Dan. So the Black Seas of Infinity, how did you crafted it?
Well, originally, like you said, it was going to be a graphic novel, so I did a number of illustrations for it, and it was a tale told by storyboard in the first couple of incarnations. And then I finally interviewed with DC Comics. I realized they would not let me release what I wanted to release, so I said, I will take that story, which has evolved over time, and now I think it's a very strong tale, and I will tell it as the illustrated novel. And that's what I did, and I published it. And as time has progressed and I've learned as an author and released other books, I I've always held on to that as one of my greatest ideas. I wanted to go back to that and rework it so it was, you know, it grabbed the reader more. It was better told.
Yes, definitely. Can you share to me the research process while writing the Black Seas of Infinity?
Well, my dad's military intelligence, so I do a little bit about the like military mechanics and the underworkings, and I did quite a bit of research, like getting books on everything from there's one called The Day After Roswell, where a guy basically talks about how the government recovered alien technology and they re-engineered it, and that's how we acquire things like infrared sensing and so on, and night vision goggles and nanotechnology. And there were some books I acquired that seemed a little bit more far fetched. I wasn't really sure, if they're making it up or they're trying to like hype it up to make it more dramatic for the reader. And those I took a little bit less seriously, but there were, all of them had elements that I could incorporate into my work.
So, Mr. Dan, what challenges did you face while writing this book?
Well, when I read the first one, I'm not. There are a lot of things. There are technical processes in any trade that you enter that you need to learn to help you become better at that trade. So when I wrote the book, some of the challenges were, how should I best express what I want to express? And over time, I've learned how to even better express that.
Very well said, Mr. Dan. But before we go on, I want to shout out to the people listening in Mexico. Muchas gracias, Mexico. Because in Mexico City, I got 86% audience share. Jalisco, 4%. Nuevo Leon at 4%. Mexico itself, 1%. Guerrero, Sonora, Puebla. Baja California Sur, Querétaro, Estado de México, Hidalgo, Yucatan, Samolas, Cuanto Roco, Baja California, and a lot more. Thank you, Mexico. Muchas gracias todos because you support this podcast because this podcast is created to empower writers all over the world like Mr. Dan Hank. So, Mr. Dan, what is your daily writing routine like?
I tend to. Some people are. They're what are called pansters. They pretty much, as they go along with the flow of the story, they make them new elements. That's not quite the way I approach it. I like to take a lot of notes and kind of have a guideline on where I'm going with the story, and I'll make up certain elements along the way. But I already have extensive notes, and I'll write until I feel that I've reached a roadblock, and then I don't want to force it. So what I'll do is I'll take a break and I'll think about the process while I do other activities, and they kind of inspire my my brain, my thinking, and my thought lines. And then when I sit back down, I have a fresh take on it, a fresh look.
How do you deal with the writer's block?
Well, as when I was much younger, it was like having new and original and dramatic ideas were something that I was more concerned about. As I've grown older, I have more ideas than I have time to put on paper. But definitely in the early days, I was not only working on how best to express myself as a writer, but is also working with what ideas are really original and striking and kind of true to the tone.
Very well said, Mr. Dan. How have your previous work influenced this current book, The Black Seas of Infinity?
Well, I like I said, I read a lot. I'm a big fan of science fiction, and I like horror, but I like horror that's more of like a well-told, fantastical, story, like a sort of a speculative fiction element to it, and that's what I prefer, and that's only grown over time, and so I've learned how to kind of more bring that to light because when you're much younger, you tend to think in more black and white terms, and some of the things that grab you when you're younger tend to be like a little bit more like cliched and a little bit more like they fall into patterns. And I didn't want to do that. I wanted to tell an original story.
Yes, and according to Mr. Mark Lawrence, very curious book. So, what are the elements that you put in the book itself that make your readers curious about it?
Well, I did kind of a deep dive into this. Like the way the government does anything that they don't want the public to know about is they compartmentalize elements. Like that's what they did with the Manhattan Project. Like when they did the nuclear bomb they used against Nagasaki and Hiroshima. So they have one segment working on one part, another segment working on another part, and they all know kind of what their part is supposed to do, but not what the ultimate result is going to be. So I have the government doing that, and there's a person that works for the government, and he figures out how to make one thing work. And not too many of his coworkers really believe them, and he eventually says, "Okay, well, I'm right, they're wrong," and he goes back and he seals it. And when he seals it, it's not really well thought out what he's going to do after that. So he's running away from what he thinks is a government chasing him, and the whole nation around him falls apart. So then he's dealing with like local militias and innocent bystanders, and like he makes it down to Mexico, and then while he's down in Mexico, he finds traces of the alien basically in other civilizations down there, and then the aliens come back, and it's kind of the whole thing is a very rocky road.
Yes, and according to Miss Leslie H, a journey well worth your time. Then, what are the elements again that you put in the story that your readers glued to it?
Well, I think that one, I did a thorough inspection of the areas that he's in. So it's like he's encountering different geographical, eccentricities. He's encountering different culture, different people, and while he's trying to deal with all of this, you know, like I said, the whole government is falling apart. So everything's in chaos. Everyone's kind of stretched to the limits. And then, right when he thinks he's finally found peace, then the aliens come back.
Yes, indeed. Before we go on, Mr. Dan, I want to invite you to listen to my other podcast, Food 101, our third season with Chef Alessandro. one of the best executive chef in one of the best five-star restaurant in downtown Toronto. And listen to our latest episode. We talk about spice, people. Spice, one of the important ingredients to create a delicious food. And plus one more, our books are out, not only one, but 12 volumes, people. Food 101, Volume 1, Basics to up to 12 is only the books you need to create a delicious food, available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Mr. Dan, how do you handle criticism, both constructive and negative?
I think one thing I've learned over time, because I've also dealt with the art community, I own a tattoo shop. So initially, when you hear criticism, especially when you're younger, you immediately think it's negative. And it might be negative, but it leads to something positive. And you need to learn how to take it in, see what you need to change about yourself, what a number of other people say, because if multiple people say it, they might be onto something. So you need to be able to take that and make yourself a better person off of it, and not just take it as like somebody putting you down.
Do you have any advice for aspiring writers out there?
I think one thing that's helped me a lot is there are a bunch of seminars by people that I like Stephen King did one. It's called On Writing, and I think he has some great tips on it. Another author I like a lot is Alan Moore, and he also did seminar. And I think I learned more from that than from anything else. But that really helps you with the flow. It also helps you if you have beta readers. But the thing is, people have diverse tastes. So maybe they dislike it because of the way it's told. Maybe they dislike it because that's not really the thing. So, but it really helps if you have other authors giving you feedback.
So, Mr. Dan, what books or authors are you currently reading or recommend?
Well, there's a great book called I think it's Joe Scalzi or something Scalzi. It's called Old Man's War. I like Old Man's War a lot. There's another book called Lucifer's Hammer, which is an awesome sort of apocalyptic asteroid smacks into the earth tale. That one's great. There, I always have a lot that I read. There are some people that I it's not necessarily the subject matter, but how well it's told. Like anything by Neil Gaiman, pretty much is amazing. Like just
Yes.
his voice, the way that he flows with this narrative, just it pulls you in regardless of what he's talking about.
Yes, people, we highly recommended Neil Gaiman mythology. It's one of a kind. Mr. Dan, how do you approach character development in the Black Seas of Infinity?
Well, it's most of the Black Seas is told in first person. Is that one character? So I think that you kind of need to look at what exactly you're handling. There's not like you know, one broad brushstroke that covers everything. You need to look at how best to portray that. And I think it also helps to say, what authors kind of illuminate and bring character to life. Like Stephen King does a great job with creating very realistic characters. So maybe you're not a huge fan of his subject matter. A lot of people aren't huge fans of his endings, but almost everyone says that he creates very realistic characters. So I think that's something that you can pay attention to and learn from.
Very well said, Mr. Dan. So, how has the publishing process been for you?
Well, it's kind of strange, and you kind of learn along the way. When I first published, I thought that um, you had to get a publisher and release it through a publisher. That was the correct official way to go. That's the only way they wouldn't take you seriously. But then I've also found that you have to thoroughly read the contracts. And some people give you some very poor contracts, and you're just so happy to get your book out. You don't read every line in the contract, and you don't realize that you're basically signing your life away. So definitely look at what's going on out there before you sign it. And there used to be this huge stigma against self-releasing stuff. I don't think there's a huge stigma anymore. So if you self-release it, but you get it, you get plenty of reviews, you send it out to plenty of people to check it out, and you get lots of feedback on it. That's not necessarily a bad thing, and it can work out better for you than if you're put up by one of the big publishers who might just take your money and do nothing with your work.
Are there any upcoming projects or books you are working on that you can share with our listeners?
I retained the rights to my first two novels. So the Black Seas Infinity was the first one. The second one is a collection of short stories by me called Down Highways in the Dark by Demons Driven. And that one, I'm re-editing all the stories, and I'm including some additional stories in there, and I'm including more illustrations in there. So I'll be pretty excited about that one.
Yes, indeed. People, I'm inviting you to uh, grab a copy of my upcoming book, Love Letters, Volume 1 History. It's all about where love story began in celebration of my 100 episodes of my love letters. Love letters are collection of love stories of people get lost, get crazy and disoriented in the name of love. We will learn from the stories and let be in their shoes to feel what it's like to be in love. So people listen to my other podcast too. Love Letters on my second season. Love Letters Volume 1 History, soon to be available on Amazon and leading online bookstores worldwide. So, Mr. Dan, what is the most rewarding aspect of being an author?
The most rewarding aspect is when people enjoy your work and they enjoy the tale that's told. And one thing that I really think that I gravitate towards is well told stories. So it doesn't necessarily have to be one genre or another, as long as it's told in a way that grabs your attention and captivates you. And so when people say that, it really it's really a boost.
Yes, very well said, Mr. Dan. So, how do you feel about the current state of the publishing industry nowadays?
I think the publishing industry has kind of gone the way of large record labels, and then they're looking for what sells. But if you're not someone that's like a Stephen King or Dean Arcus, you have to do a lot of promotion by yourself. And the thing is, you might get more readers, but you will definitely not receive more money, and you might not retain any rights, and you might have trouble like writing future editions that are kind of like the second or third book in the series if somebody else has the rights to them.
So, Mr. Dan, if you go back and give advice to yourself when you're first starting out as a writer, what would it be?
I would say definitely, check out the seminars by people that like, because back in the day when I wrote the first one, it was, I mean, this is back in like the late 2000s. So there's a lot less social media. So I had a lot less feedback. So I was unaware that, there are lots of people that are out there now. They weren't then, but they're out there now. And their work really helps to influence you. Like I said, like the seminar by Alan Moore, the seminar by Stephen King, they really help you, and anything that you do, send out to beta readers and listen to their feedback.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Dan, for that. And lastly, where can our listeners find more about you and your work?
We'll have an Amazon authors page. It's my name, Dan Henk. I have a website, danhenk.com. So everything's on my website, but if you go to the Amazon author page, it's all my latest updates just related to novels.
Yes, people, let's support Mr. Dan Hank because he should support and more books to come. If you give five adjective of your latest novel, The Black Seas of Infinity, what are they?
Just five. Let's see. I don't know. There's definitely a cosmic horror aspect to it. Um, so I don't know, cosmic horror, um, maybe ambition, like whether it's good or bad. Ambition drives a lot of people. Um, I think government intrigue, also plays a huge factor in everything. Recovered alien technology. Um, I have a little bit about if you're familiar with Graham Hancock, he wrote a whole theory about how he calls us a species with amnesia. He talks about how there's a much longer history, to the human race than we think there is. So all those are elements of it, but it's mainly one lone guy, and he learns that there's a whole universe out there he has to deal with.
Definitely. So, Mr. Van, the Black Seas of Infinity is good for a series or a motion picture.
I think it would be better as a motion picture. I think most novels actually, especially most like old school novels, like the ones I mentioned, like Lucifer's Hammer, would be better as a series because you can more fully develop the character. And one thing I really like that a lot of people miss these days is backstory. I think the backstory really adds the element of care to the characters.
Very well said, Mr. Dan. And can you please invite our listeners to support all your books?
The Black Caesar Infinity is available. It's available in Amazon, Barnes and Nobles. It's available on Kindle, hardback, paperback. The Never Dead is available in all three of those, and also in audio. You can find it. My quote is wherever fine books are sold. So
Yeah.
you can find it anywhere, pretty much.
Yes, people, again, let's support Mr. Dan Hank because something else that need to support. Mr. Dan, thank you for your time. Moricam people, see you soon.